Okay, sorry about that, folks. I just had a few last minute things I wanted to put together here. By the way, this week or last week, I went outside and I saw my shadow, and you know what that means. Revelation series extended 6 more weeks. So. Or it'll be 6 more weeks till we get there or something, you know, the 6 weeks thing, the future. I saw this, you know, I often joke about this, my little trouble ahead sign that's duct taped to the future roads exit sign. I saw this one today about, you know, everybody says, well, you're so negative. And I said, okay, well, I believe I found this poster that sort of encapsulates that the future really is going to be pretty bright. And, oh, the future is going to be bright, all right, it says. We're going to do a prophecy update this week. Some of the things I'm going to do today, you might have heard a little bit. I'm going to try to practice on you, what I'm going to be doing down in Florida just a little bit, and then some other things. And we're going to get to the update about Iran there at the end that we didn't get to last week. I want to follow up on this. This was what we talked about last week. And if you remember, we said that the nation of America, like every other nation in the world, has a rapidly declining birth rate. Ours is down to about 1.6. 2.1 is replacement level. And I did dispel notions to the rumor that ours, instead of being one, if Myra triplet wasn't around, it would be 1.5 instead of 1.6. But there's no truth to that rumor. But we do appreciate them taking up the slack for a lot of other people. But it's interesting. We talk about the immigration. There's a big immigration debate. And the immigration debate may not be relevant because Mexico, the fertility rate used to be 6.7. What they found is that the immigrants to America had, for a very short time, very high fertility rates, and now their fertility rates are below replacement level. They've adopted our culture very quickly, and throughout almost every country of Central and South America where we got a lot of our immigration from, all of their birth rates have now fallen below the 2.1 replacement rate, which means that we can't count on immigrants. That's going to lead to generational war. You get a foretaste. You want to know what's coming? Watch what's going on in some of the European social democracies and in Japan. This was reported a couple weeks ago. The new finance minister of Japan said this: Japan's new government is barely a month old, and already one of its most senior members has insulted tens of millions of voters by suggesting that the elderly are an unnecessary drain on the country's finances. Taro Aso, the finance minister, said on Monday that the elderly should be allowed to hurry up and die to relieve pressure on the state to pay for their medical care. To compound the insult, he referred to elderly patients who are no longer able to feed themselves as two people. The Health and Welfare Ministry, he added, was well aware that it costs several tens of millions of yen a month to treat a single patient in the final stages of life. By the way, he comes from the Liberal Party in Japan. Caring and compassionate death panels. And if the birth rate doesn't change and the Lord doesn't return, I'm telling you that there will be enormous pressure everywhere for those things to happen. And I look around this room and I see a number of people with, well, no or gray hair, and and that's what's coming to America. It's interesting that at this time in world history, when Israel's back in the land, the nations are aligning, now the world has a demographic time bomb. And those demographic time bombs can cause enormous geopolitical problems. I don't know if I mentioned here last week, but there are reports that because of the favor boys in India, that India will soon have 100 million excess males over females of marriageable age. Does that sound like that's a good thing or a bad thing? In China, it's approaching and will soon be, I've heard, up to about 150 million males of marriageable age with no female prospect. I will note the passage in Revelation that talks about a 200 million man army coming from a certain part of the world, but I don't know if that's related to that or not. Could be. Here's a little discussion on the Blaze News the other night about this declining birth rate. I think you should see this because I think this is sort of encapsulates everything.
So what are we in for? I mean, I think a lot of people would hear this, the idea that we're having fewer kids, more resources for us, great. In fact, it's just the opposite. Tell us what we're in for.
Right, so the first thing that happens when your fertility rate goes down is your age profile inverts. You have lots more old people than young people. This has been a predictable set of consequences. Your entitlement programs have trouble being sustained. You have too many retirees, not enough workers.
Good thing we've sorted out that problem.
Right, and we got, right, so, imagine just like it is now, but worse.
Right.
And then the next thing that happens is you get economic stagnation. We can see this already happening in Greece. We can see it in Japan. And the reason you get this is because demand shrinks. Old people consume less of just about everything except for healthcare. Capital pools shift because younger people invest capital aggressively because they have long-term horizons. Old people draw their capital down. Your cohorts of young people, 20 to 40, which is typically where your entrepreneurs and your inventors come from, those cohorts get real skinny. And so again, the entire economy grinds to a halt. As I said, this is what you've seen in Japan since 1990. And after that, things get really grim. Right. And then you begin to face generational warfare. And because you wind up in a very zero-sum game. Last week in Japan, the finance minister there, Timothy Geithner, came out and said that it was time for Japanese old people to, quote, hurry up and die. Like he wasn't kidding around. This wasn't a Joe Biden moment. And he didn't lose his job. And this tells you that, you're seeing the ground for some very unstable times, some unstable moments.
And so what kind of national security dangers are we facing? I know that you outlined some of those as well.
Right, so it's twofold, really. First of all, your defense budget dries up. We're seeing this already with sequestration because you're robbing from Peter at the Pentagon to pay Paul at the Social Security office. Okay. And secondly, again, your cohort of military-age men and women, 18 to 24, that gets real skinny. You have a hard time just raising an army. Now, this would be fine if we were Sweden, right? Sweden isn't responsible for global security, but we kind of are, for better or for worse. And because this is a global phenomenon, it's not just here. It's fine when Japan becomes unstable because of all this. It's fine when America becomes unstable because of it. But when it starts happening in China, it starts happening in Russia, in poorer countries, you wind up with the possibility of some real global problems.
So, Jonathan, I think it's important to underline the fact you're not painting a hypothetical dystopian future. You're pointing to societies that have already done this. Japan, Europe have gone down this path. That being said, you also have a tension in your argument whenever you want to start proposing solutions. And that is this, that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, children were an economic benefit. You had children to help bring the family money to work the farm. I have 2 children. They are no economic benefit. They are a huge economic burden and a decision that you make to educate and raise them. And that's the status. Children have essentially become a sign of wealth, a luxury item. How do you change that?
Actually, the opposite. Actually, children are a marker of social failure in a lot of ways. This is why you look at the socioeconomic scale, and the higher up you go, the fewer children people have. In fact, it used to be quite different. Up until about 1750, it was the opposite. People higher up the elite status, more education, more money, had more children. And what we found, the research shows, is fertility is always an aspirational behavior. It has been going back 700 years. And so what has always happened is people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale pattern their fertility behaviors upon their social betters, if we're allowed to talk that way. And around 1750, when the elite started having fewer children, it's like the opposite of idiocracy. The people lower down on the totem pole changed their behavior and started having fewer too. The reason demographers worry about this is because if you think about it, it's anti-Darwinian. And so you wind up in a situation where it costs a lot of money to raise children.
Survival of the weakest.
Right, survival of the weakest in a way. But even worse because, people further down the scale aren't just unthinkingly popping out kids.
Right.
They're looking at the people who have succeeded and saying, well, gosh, why am I spending, the total cost is $1.1 million. Look, she's Dr. $1.1 million.
That's what it is. $1.1 to what? To raise a kid?
To raise a kid, once you count college and foregone wages through the age of 20.
So, Jonathan, what about the puzzle? What about the puzzle, though, that across cultures and societies, as they industrialize, people have fewer
children. And an economics professor told me years ago, when I was in college years ago, he asked the class, which country in Western Europe has the lowest birth rate? And everybody was calling out names, and it turned out it was Italy, which would be counterintuitive. I mean, the seat of Catholic, the Catholic faith that encourages people to reproduce, and they were resisting that. So if the Pope can't get you to have more kids, even though that's your most deeply held faith, how are you going to get, secular Americans?
Well, the Georgian patriarch has been able to get the people of Georgia to have kids, oddly enough. We're the only country to recover from lowest low fertility and recover to replacement. The only country in world history is Georgia. They dropped down to 1.3 following liberation from the Soviet Union and their civil war. And then their patriarch, Ilya II, looked around at their demographic problems and said, I will personally baptize the third-born child of everyone in Georgia. The Georgians are really devout. They're into this. And beginning the next year, you saw, I think it was a 26% increase in fertility.
I'm not sure it's going to work.
No, the point is, though, it doesn't work from here. And all this is, I only mention this as the exception proves the rule. And the short answer is, we're not going to be able to get people to do it. We're doomed.
But we're doomed. So, yes.
When they say generational warfare, is this just a...
See those young kids over there? They're coming after you. Because you're going to expect them to pay your Social Security, and there ain't enough of them to pay all of you. So it's generational warfare. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, will it break out in actual warfare?
So
I don't know.
The comment the Japanese politician, prime minister, whatever it was that indication of generational warfare between whatever age he is and the people that...
Well, there's one solution, is to take the money, everything that the young people earn. They're probably not going to want to work if you do that. The other solution is kill the old people. I'm not sure the third solution. I don't know anybody's come up with it. So I saw a hand over here.
Soil and green.
Soil and green, yeah. The interesting thing is this has never happened in the history of planet Earth. It's never happened. But it's happening now. That's my point. Yes, sir.
What's the birth rate in country of Israel today?
It's right around replacement rate, maybe a little bit above. There's only a few countries in the world where it's above replacement rate. This is even happening in the Muslim world too. So, you think the aging Saudi royal family still needs people to go out and work the oil fields so they can live in their palaces that they build everywhere?
Well, we've already been killing the babies through abortion.
Correct.
That if those people were around, there wouldn't be a real problem.
There were not. No, I mean we've off 55 million Americans, and that's 55 million people who would be working and earning money and paying for the older generation. I mean, the whole demographically, when FDR set up Social Security, it worked. You know, it didn't kick in until people were 65, and the average age, people were dying before then. So now everybody's living till. I mean, look around the room. I mean, a lot of us are approaching or past 60, and a lot of us still have parents around. It didn't happen a generation ago. It's a different thing. So I can remember one day I was playing golf with somebody, and he's 75, and he had to leave at the turn to go take care of his mother. I'm like, you're 75. You got a mother? You've been retired for 10 years. Yeah, mother's still alive. I was with a judge once. He had the federal judge. He was in his mid-70s, and he had to leave at lunch to go take care of his mother, who was in her 90s. It's just, this is not something that happened a generation ago, and it upsets the apple cart in so many ways. And so it's just one more thing, I think, that you can layer on that. We got some bumps in the road ahead. I talked last week about, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Remind me to say something about smart meters. This is just an interesting graphic. This is the Earth without water, without surface water. And if you take all the surface water and put it in one bubble, That's about the size. The big bubble on the left is the size that it would be. The bubble on the right is the fresh water in the world. Now, I will confess that, or I will admit that this graphic is a little bit distorted because that bubble is the mass of water relative to the mass of the entire Earth. So maybe the bubble should be bigger because really, humans, we only live, we don't use the whole Earth way deep down. You know, a lot of it's inaccessible to us. Most of what humans do is within 4 kilometers of the surface. Do you know that? So about 2 miles down is about as far as they go. And so we're not using, there's a lot more on Earth there than there is that. So, but that just shows you that there are some issues with water. But then again, maybe declining population is the answer, that so people won't need as much water. But we live in this time of exponential growth. Now, what does Yankee Stadium have to do with exponential growth? If you remember, I've used this graphic before, and I want to talk about this at the conference in Florida next week, because we live at a time where everything is increasing exponentially. Debt, problems, prophecies being fulfilled, prophecies getting ready to be fulfilled. I want you to grasp the understanding of the concept of exponential growth. And I used this example once before. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you remember, but let's say we take Yankee Stadium and we make it watertight, and including the field, so it doesn't absorb water, and we chain you to the second row from the top in the stadium. And what we're going to do is we're going to take an eyedropper, and we're going to drop a drop of water by second base, okay? Then the next time we do it, we're going to drop 2 drops of water to add to the drop that's already there, then 4 drops of water to add to the 3 that's already there, then 8 more drops, then 16 drops, and on and on and on. Every minute we do that, okay? How long do you think you have till you have to be free from that second row to the top, or you're underwater?
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Less than 50 minutes. Isn't that amazing? Less than 50 minutes. In fact, at about 42 minutes, and I know if Ron Allerton is listening to this, I know that he'll do the math for me and tell me. He actually did the last time. And less than 50 minutes, and at about 42 minutes, the stadium is still 97% empty.
In 49 minutes, it's half.
Correct. That's exactly right. Yeah, I used this example a couple weeks ago. The second half of the chessboard, supposedly this is an old Chinese proverb. I don't think it's probably an old Chinese proverb, but English people say it's an old Chinese proverb because then people will listen more to it than they say if it's an old Scottish proverb or something. So, but supposedly the inventor of the chessboard, the emperor of China, said, well, what can I give you for this great game that you've invented? And he said, well, I want you to give me today a grain of rice. And I want you to double the rice you give me every day. So after 32 days, now he's accumulated all of these. And you can see how the numbers, well, it's only 128 grains of rice after 8 days. Big deal. And it's only 32,000 after 16. But by day 32, it's a couple billion grains of rice. Plus, he's got all the rice before him. And by now, the Chinese emperor wants out of the deal because it's going to bankrupt him. That's a concept of exponential growth. I want to... Okay. I have another cool one where you fold paper. And for some reason, I forgot to put that in this one. But if you fold a piece of paper that's 0.002 centimeters thick, and you fold it, so fold it in half, it's twice the thickness. Then do it again, it's 4 times the thickness. How many folds? Well, after, I'm going to have to go from memory here. After about 15 folds, you're half an inch. Okay? At 47th fold, you hit the moon. Okay? That's exponential growth. And by the way, the 48th fold gets you all the way back. Remember that. So that's exponential growth. Scripture tells us, though, at the end, that things will happen very quickly. For example, in Matthew chapter 24, it says, and they did not understand, talking about the days of Noah, until the flood came and took them away. And that's what it's going to be like at the end, at the time of the Lord's return in the world. Things are going to happen very, very quickly. It will be like a flood. I remember the example. Went to high school in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Johnstown, Pennsylvania is known for a flood. And everybody says, "Oh yeah, how did you deal with the flood?" Well, it happened in 1889, and I wasn't around then. But my parents moved. There was one in 1977. And an interesting thing, some friends of mine told what happened. They lived down near the river. And what happened was they got 10 or 12 inches of rain in about 6 hours. And all that water rushed off the hill. But the problem was that the water didn't come up rapidly or come up gradually. Some friends of mine said, all of a sudden, a wall of water 25 feet high came down the street a block away and wiped out everything. There was a little bit, it went up, and then all of a sudden, here comes a wall of water. That's what the end times, Jesus said, is going to be like. Daniel talks a little bit about it. The end will come like a flood in Daniel chapter 9. I want to use, this is a great example of, I want you to watch these people. Remember the tsunami in, Boxing Day tsunami in Asia, in the Indian Ocean, in December 26, 2004. There was a massive 8-point-something earthquake off of Indonesia, and earthquakes hit, killing, I think, 300,000 or 400,000 people altogether, including 32,000 people in Sri Lanka, 1,000 miles away from the wave that comes in. But I want you to watch, this is a film from Thailand, Khao Lak, a little bit north of Phuket, a resort area in Thailand. And I want you to watch these people and watch what's going on, because what you'll see at the beginning is that the ocean has retreated. And it's exposed all the reefs and everything that are in the harbor there. And people are out walking around the reef. Wow, isn't that really cool? Isn't that weird that the ocean, they said, and you'll hear some of it, the video quality is not good. This was only 9 years ago, but video camera quality has improved quite a bit. But just watch, this is a few minutes long. You see the ocean has gone out? See all the reefs?
My wife looked at me and said, "Hey, what's going up there? The water's gone."
Und in so kurzer Zeit, ne?
Strange and quiet. It looked like somebody had taken the plug out of the sea, and people were drawn to it because it looked so strange. There was a sense of calm. There was no sense of panic whatsoever. You could see forming up from left to right a beautiful crescent on the horizon. It looked quite lovely. We were spellbound, everybody was looking at it. But at that time, there was no way to know how big the wave was.
Die brechen da hinten, die Wellen, die brechen da hinten noch heftig, oder? Alter Schwede. I filmed the scene again and again.
Was ist das?
I was in a special way fascinated about it.
Guck mal da hinten, Schnee, wie das hochpasht. Das Wasser.
I said to myself, hey, what a perfect wave. Hammer. Was da hinten abgeht? Nein. Aber da hinten, das ist ja Wahnsinn. Das ist wirklich... ผมรบกวนแจ้งชัยจังดูนะครับตอนนี้มีพายุ
Now some of the locals are getting it. You see them running the ties. The British tourists are just standing there. Military boats in the harbor there.
Das Fischerboot da hinten ist gekentert. Was ist das? Tsunami. That was the moment I realized we were really in danger. Komm, wir müssen raus. Wir müssen weg. Nach hinten, komm. Wir müssen nach hinten.
And then it just went straight over one of the ships. Now,
Well, you can find that online, the tsunami caught and captured. But see, that's a picture of what the end times will be with the rapid fulfillment of Bible prophecy and problems coming on in the world. It may seem like everything's okay. Okay, it may seem like the most important thing is the Ohio State-Michigan game at 1 o'clock. And yes, you'll be out in time to see that. Indiana, I'm sorry. Indiana. It's at Indiana at Ohio State, right? Okay. And, but it's not, because the Bible has given us a really clear roadmap about a lot of things. 4 or 5 years ago, we started talking in here about transhumanism. And this was a year ago, almost exactly 1 year ago. This was the cover of Time magazine. 2045, the year man becomes immortal. Now, Time magazine is what you would call a mainstream media publication. What our friend Martine Erdman and then Patrick Wood, when he was here, talked about was the development of transhumanism. And I'm sure that some of us, some of you, some of us, thought, yeah, okay. And Martine shares with me some of the emails that he gets back from pastors as he warns them about what's coming. And they're like, Martin, it's only a movie. It's only a commercial. It's good for us. It's nice to have better computers. By the way, you want a sign of the end times? John and Kathy Dickey have smartphones now, okay? So I just thought I would point that out. So when you see Kathy walking in here with a thing like this sticking out of her neck, then you need to be very afraid. So, but this transhumanism, it's coming like a flood. The exponential growth in computer technology. I got my first computer 20 years ago, March 1st. 1993. Now, why do I remember that? I started a new job that day and I got a computer. And I thought it was pretty cool. It was a 386, 40 megabytes of hard drive and 2 megabytes of RAM. And now our smartphones have thousands of times the storage capability and are way faster than that thing that sat on my desk. And yeah, and I didn't carry my desk thing. I did have one of the first Toshiba laptops. That thing weighed about 20 pounds, and it had a little screen about that big. It was, you know, gray and black, not even shades of gray, and it had little dots on it. It was, but Edwin Black, who was on Glenn Beck the other day, and I just want to play a couple clips of that because I think you'll see a little bit about where this technology is going. By the way, smart meters. Nobody reminded me, by the way. Thank you. I just got a news report from one of the email news sources that I get that there was a lady in Western Ohio who refused to allow the power company to install a smart meter in her home yesterday. And so what did the power company do? By the way, she's handicapped, so what did the power company do? Shut off her power. Now, it was reported that it took a few hours Governor Kasich actually called, I believe, the Glenn Beck News Service or Firewire, and the power has been restored to her home. But this is not a theoretical thing that we talk about now. This is what's coming. You just need to be prepared for it. So here's a little bit about transhumanism. Edwin Black wrote a book. He's studied this, probably one of the world experts on this topic. His first book was called IBM and the Holocaust. What does IBM have to do with the Holocaust? How do you think the Jews were tracked by the Nazis? They used IBM early computer technology to find out where everybody was and to track them, and that's why their killing machine was so efficient.
It's called the Transhumanist movement. I've never heard of the Transhumanist movement. Tell me about it.
I first studied the Transhumanist movement about 10 years ago when I first wrote War Against the Weak, and learned that it was a society that was trying to engineer their own genetic future, their own human design. It's self-enhanced and self-managed evolution. Quite clearly, it means that if an individual within the transhumanist movement has the technology and the desire and the money and the wherewithal to inject armadillo DNA into his own to get hard skin and become a big warrior, or perhaps a great singer or anything, then they will go ahead and do that. And they will see a divide within the world, within society, the gen rich or the gen ennobled, those who are genetically superior, and all those who are destined to serve them.
Correct.
Which is, of course, the Hitler motif.
And now this sounds absolutely crazy, but Al Gore talks about it in his book.
I was astonished to read that this morning.
Yeah.
And he also falsely gives the history of eugenics with lip service to some of Hitler's greatest allies in the United States, such as Harry Laughlin from the Carnegie Institution.
Okay, so he talks about it, and it's not really armadillo skin. You say one of the leaders of this is a guy who's been on this program before, Ray Kurzweil.
Well, he's one of the members, the leaders of the transhumanist program.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And it's not an armadillo, it's electronics. You're upgrading yourself, at least.
It's anything. Armadillo skin is just one example. You might want to put a computer chip in your mind. Correct. You might want to sharpen your eyesight in a certain way. Anything that the individual feels is good for him to enhance his own evolution, it is personal selection and self-managed evolution.
So let's start there. Let's go with because I saw this, and when I saw it on Friday while I was on the radio show, and I immediately said to my producers, I said, please get Mr. Black on the phone and find out if he sees what I see in this. Let me play this clip, which will go over most people's heads, and they'll think, oh, no big deal. Watch the clip and tell me what it means.
The scientists now know that there is in human nature a divide between what we sometimes call liberals and conservatives. And it gives an advantage, you can speculate, to the human species to have some people who are temperamentally inclined to try to change the future and experiment with new things, and others who are temperamentally inclined to say, hey, wait a minute, not too fast. Let's make sure we don't do anything rash here. And this divide is found in every country, every culture, every ethnicity. It's part of our human makeup. And when these natural tendencies are accentuated with political ideologies, or for that matter, religious factions and the other divides that are sometimes used for advantage, then it can get out of hand.
What does that mean to you?
Well, first, I'm very disappointed that Al Gore made these silly remarks, not addressing any political point of view, but simply on the facts, he's dead wrong. On the history, he's completely wrong. The science is junk science, and the philosophy is at the base of the same philosophy that gave us eugenics in the United States, which sought to destroy 90% of our neighbors, eventually 10% at a time, beginning with some 14 million people in the first years of the 20th century, and then continuing to take off 10% at a time, and ultimately resulted in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. That's not a broken line, that's not a jagged line, that's a direct line.
Right.
The factual history that it is the liberals who are the great innovators. Henry Ford, who was one of the greatest innovators in the 20th century, Thomas Edison, Patton, these men were ultra-conservative to a fault. They were some of the greatest innovators in the history of the world.
What I got from Al Gore is, look, it's genetic. There's people that want to move us forward, and there's people that want to move us backwards. They want to hold up. And it's not just that there are, because those, as he says it with a laugh, those things happen. You know, maybe we have to slow down from time to time. But what's really dangerous is when those people, he explains, are co-opted by religious or political organizations, because then those religious and political organizations are only using those stupid people to stop us from doing progress.
This is politicized science. And this same politicized science that was used in the United States became a national biology, eugenics, also became an instrument of terror in the Third Reich, where anyone who was deemed to be out of favor with the Third Reich was automatically declared to be an enemy of the state, and they found some eugenic problem in his DNA. Remember, under eugenics, you were not born into prostitution. Prostitution was born into you.
Right.
And so this is a horrible conjunction of junk science and politics.
Now, there's a lot that you can say about this theologically, one of which is the whole transhumanism movement is really nothing more than a revival of the first rebellion against God, where the Babylonians said, or the people in Babel said, we will build a tower up to the heavens and we shall be as God. And it's not changed. And it's coming back, and it's coming back with a vengeance at the time that Israel's in the land. That's what's interesting. And it is relevant to our study, postponed a little bit, of Revelation 17, because there is a revived empire at the end that comes out one of the early empires. We'll talk more about this, but in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, what kingdom was represented by the head of gold? Babylon. It is possible that Babylon, religiously, through transhumanism, and economically, is coming back. One thing you should know is that things in the world can change very quickly. Now, we haven't heard much about Iraq lately. We're hearing a little bit more bit by bit, maybe a little bit more in our prophecy update, but I want to go over some of this in the this Arab Spring. Some of this is a week old. Egypt, they were warning that Egypt could collapse because the Muslim Brotherhood has moved too quickly to take over. This is a protest of Muslim Brotherhood supporters in Cairo a week ago. They're holding up a Quran. They want Sharia law to be enacted in Egypt. The Salafists are probably more powerful than the Muslim Brotherhood there, and the Salafists are probably, are not probably, they are more committed to Sharia law than the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood's totally committed to it. So do the math. They are attacking the other regimes. Sometimes editorial cartoons are a good indication as to what people really believe. This is Mubarak in a casket wrapped in an Israeli flag because, of course, he loved the Jews. Some of you are familiar with Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch. He's a courageous little guy, and I respect his work. He writes a lot about Islam and what lies at the heart of Islam, what they really believe, whether they practice it or not. He has a new book coming out, Not Peace But a Sword. It's a play on Jesus' words. The Great Chasm Between Christianity and Islam. This book will be released soon. You might want to pick it up. I think it would be worth a read, especially, I think, in light of what the facts on the ground are telling us, that the end times might have something to do with an Islamic empire revived in the end times, or coming to power in the end times. By the way, Robert Spencer was supposed to speak at a forum, dialogue between Catholics, Christians, and Muslims in Worcester, Mass., and the Catholic cardinal up there disinvited him because it would be, what he had to say would be damaging to Islam, which, if you look at a thing called Lectium Geniti, was published in 1964 by the Vatican II, Second Vatican Ecumenical Council. Look at paragraph 16 of that, which says that Muslims worship the same God as Catholics and Christians. That view, by the way, that was written in 1964. That view is becoming more and more common in evangelicalism. Allah, God, same thing. Not even close. Iraq, they're starting to have some more trouble there. The divide between Sunni and Shia is probably strongest in that country, just because it's a little around 50-50. The current leadership, Maliki, is a Shiite. The Sunnis don't like that. There's a lot of protests going on. But what's interesting, too, at the same time that all this is happening is, and I couldn't find the source this morning, but I'm pretty sure that I read that Iraq is on the verge of becoming the second largest oil producer in the world very shortly, because they've been able to, with our help and our money, revive their oil production capabilities. And regardless of what Al Gore thinks, oil is going to predominate for a good while because it's the most efficient energy source that you can get. And he can afford, with his, when he left office, he was worth between $1 and $2 million. You know what he's worth now? Estimate about $500 million. So, Vatican and Israel are getting close to upgrading their relationship, talking about handling some of the holy sites in Jerusalem. We talk about this convergence of prophetic events. Things are happening that in our world are helping to flesh out prophetic scriptures. Let me give you an example of this. I just got a new book, Psalm 83 Revisited by Bill Salus. I have to read it. I'm supposed to see him in a couple weeks, and I don't want him to say, well, what did you think of my book? And so hopefully I'll get to read it. I just looked at it this morning. It's 350 pages long. He needs to write shorter books. But
send it to Martine.
Yeah, I'll send it to Martine. Yeah, Martine will read it. Yeah. But here, one of the things that's flagged in that book is prophecies in Isaiah chapter 11. Look at what it says in Isaiah chapter 11. Then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be cut off. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. They will swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines on the west. Together they will plunder the sons of the east. They will possess Edom and Moab, and the sons of Ammon will be subject to them. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. Well, who are they? That's referenced in verse 14. They'll swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines. They will plunder the sons. They will possess Edom. The sons of Ammon will be subject to them. Who is that? You might get an idea looking back at verse 11. It says, "Then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover the second time with his hand the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he will lift up a standard of the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." This is exactly what happened. So the they is essentially the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, will swoop down on the Palestinians. But 70 years ago would have been in the middle of World War II, and that verse didn't mean then what it does. It doesn't have the depth of meaning that it does in the context of what's going on in the world today. So all of these events, again, are converging at the same time. I don't remember why I put this up here. This is the Dome of the Rock. It's a blasphemous building. It has an inscription on the inside that says God has no son. It sits where many people believe the Jewish temple used to sit and may sit in the future. The UN released a report, and it says here, Israel may be the first country to boycott the United Nations Human Rights Council review. They actually did, and the report came out about a week ago, calling for sanctions against Israel over what? Having the audacity to build in the mountains of Israel and Judea and Samaria. Imagine that. Jews building in their homeland. And the word is that they think that they will take them to the International Criminal Court, including the leaders and military people who support the settlements. Israeli settlements are located beyond the 1949 Greenland and include structures in East Jerusalem and an area C of the West Bank. Settlements are generally located amongst the more vulnerable sections of Palestinian society, predominantly agrarian villages. All spheres of Palestinian life are being significantly affected by a minority of settlers who are engaged in violence and intimidation with the aim of forcing Palestinians off their land. And here's a picture of a family in their coffin. So by the way, those are not Palestinians. Those are Israeli settlers who were savagely stabbed and murdered in their village in the West Bank. Actually, Judea or Samaria. I believe it was the Berg family about 2 years ago. This is the area of dispute, that orange area. The area on the right, one of the Israeli proposals is we get the dark shaded area, the light area will go to the Palestinians. I think that's actually prophesied in Scripture. There is a division that's coming. At least the world is working on it. This is a word out of one of the news reports that I read. Obama secretly pledges to divide Jerusalem. Now that he has secured a second term, President Barack Obama has already secretly pledged to the Palestinians he will press Israel into a new round of so-called land for peace negotiations, a top Palestinian Authority negotiator told Klein online. Just before November's presidential election, a senior Palestinian Authority negotiator claimed to Klein online, if Obama secures another 4 years in office, he will use his second term to target Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the main party to blame for the collapse of Mideast peace talks. The negotiator further claimed that Obama quietly pledged to the Palestinians a campaign at the United Nations to renew UN Security Council Resolution 242, which calls for Israel, for a Palestinian state, in the 1967 borders. The negotiator further said Obama had promised the Palestinian Authority that the establishment of a Palestinian state will be one of the main priorities for a second term. There is a division coming. I've told you that as I read Ezekiel 35 through 37, these verses, such as this one, in Ezekiel 35:12, then you will know that I, the Lord, have heard all your revilings, which you have spoken against the mountains of Israel, saying they are laid desolate, they are given to us for food. I don't know if you caught the reference in that news report to agrarian villages of the Palestinians. I believe this is talking about a temporary two-state solution, and then I think that's a precursor to the Psalm 83 war that Bill Salas has written so well about. Remember, in Obadiah, which is a prophecy against Edom, and remember these prophecies, they had current application in that time, they had future application as well. Obadiah is a prophecy against Edom, the people who live as if the eagle. What's the symbol of the Palestinian Authority? The eagle. And the Palestinian people claim in their own writings that they're Edomites. And I go read Obadiah. It doesn't work out well for them. But it talks about in Obadiah verse 10, for thy violence against thy brother, Jacob shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. That word there is a Hebrew word pronounced Hamas, for thy violence, for thy Hamas against thy brother Jacob. There are these little word plays that come up every now and then, and they're very interesting in Scripture that I think we can't dismiss them. They happen too often for it to be a coincidence. I'll skip over this very quickly. This is about the attack in Syria. My understanding is the IDF is on very high alert because of what the situation in Syria is. It continues to deteriorate. Netanyahu was saying publicly that you have to really watch what's going on in Syria because of the chemical weapons that regime has. There have been alerts issued in Israel. There was this Israeli airstrike on Syrian convoys that were going from Syria to Lebanon to the Bekaa Valley. Those attacks occurred in the area just outside the Golan Heights. Some of you have been to the Golan Heights. To give you guys some, if you haven't been there, you're not a geographic freak like I am. I love maps. But if you're in the Golan on your tours, you will stop in this area right here, just above where it says Golan Heights. And at that point, the suburbs of Damascus are about 20 miles away. From there to the center of Damascus is maybe 35 miles. So this happened literally just outside the Israeli border. There were supposedly a couple of strikes. Some of it was said that there were these Soviet SA-17. This will give you some idea. The strikes would have occurred in this tongue that stands up here, right up in this area. Beirut is on that peninsula in the upper left-hand corner. Biblical sites tell Dan, Caesarea Philippi are located right down here. So those are all within 5-10 miles of where this strike occurred. There are reports that there were multiple strikes. Some of them might have been on weapons facilities. I have some video clips that I'm going to skip over. Iran and Syria have threatened to respond, to retaliate against Israel, but Iran has come back and said, well, maybe not. It's a big problem. Again, reports are that they attacked multiple sites, and I want to skip over this because it's there's a lot going on. These are Iron Dome deployments along the Lebanese border, the Israeli-Lebanese border in northern Israel, because they expect some problems with Hamas. There's also a battle going on right now. There's a ring road around Damascus where they're having a lot of battles, and there's a fight over Damascus International Airport. If you are planning on flying in there anytime soon, you might want to call your airline. So Syria is a major issue. It's bleeding over into Lebanon, and there are Aleppo is in northern Syria. This was the scene there about a week ago in the riverbed that flows through there. The Syrian army had dumped multiple bodies. in the riverbed there. Now, let's go to Iran, and we'll be out of here before noon. Leon Panetta says the Iranian threat spreads. Last week I played you a couple clips of Norman Podhoretz and Bernard Lewis, two really wise old guys talking about Iran. So today I played clips of other things that they were talking about last week about the threat of Islam. This week they're going to focus on Iran. This is from Uncommon Knowledge from the Hoover Institution. The interviewer is Peter Robinson. Podhoretz is on your left. Bernard Lewis is on your right. Bernard Lewis is probably the leading living historian on the Middle East in the world today. He's a professor emeritus at Princeton. So here's a couple clips, and then we'll be out of here.
If Iran gets the bomb, it is hard, if not impossible, to see how a nuclear exchange between Iran and Israel could be avoided. Close quote. Now, you know the answer to that, Norman. The Soviet Union had the bomb, and we had the bomb, and we sat facing each other for 4.5 decades and did not engage in a nuclear exchange.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you Bernard Lewis's answer to that question, and then I'll give you my own. Bernard Lewis points out that deterrence worked with the Soviets and the Chinese because the Soviets were not suicidal, and they knew that if they launched this first strike, there would be a second strike that would annihilate them. Mutual assured destruction.
And it worked.
And mutual assured destruction can't work in relation to Iran because these are people who, you might say, are in love with easeful death.
Exactly. For them, it's not a deterrent, it's an inducement.
So
Truly.
Yeah, well, those 72 versions beckon. Now, I will give you my answer to that. That's Bernard's answer to the question. My answer to the question is to imagine a scenario which most people are horrified. I mean, I've tried this at speeches all the time, and people shy away from it. Imagine that Iran gets the bomb, okay? And the Israelis are sitting there and asking themselves, do we wait for them to hit us and then retaliate out of the rubble, or do we preempt and hit them first? The Iranians are asking themselves the same question. Do we wait for the Israelis to hit us, or do we hit them first? We've never had a hair trigger situation like that since the invention of nuclear weapons. And if you just imagine that, you know, the rulers of Israel, the rulers of Iran, asking themselves that question, somebody is going to beat the other to the punch. And I can't see that unstable situation lasting for very long, maybe even as long as a few weeks or months.
And you would agree. But Bert, here's what I find so striking. You will hear it said among people who are not deep students of the situation, that the notion that the notion of the glorious death is an inducement to the radicals in the Muslim world, not a deterrent. And here I sit across from a man who has devoted his life to the study of Islam, who is universally regarded as the greatest living historian of the world of Islam, and he says, yes, as a matter of fact, that's exactly right. It is an inducement. Deterrence would not work. You confirm that for me.
I would do, yes. With those who are committed believers in the old sense.
Here's a little bit more.
Islam has brought comfort and peace of mind to countless millions of men and women. It inspired a great civilization. But Islam has also known periods when it inspired in some of its followers a mood of hatred and violence. It is our misfortune that part of the Muslim world is now going through such a period, and that much of that hatred is directed against us. Close quote. And the most important questions of the day lie right in that one paragraph. Why are they going through such a period of hatred now? And why do they direct their hatred against us?
In Muslim perception, there is an endless struggle going on between the true believers and the misbelievers. And this struggle will go on until the final stage when the true believers will triumph and the misbelievers will be conquered and either converted or subjugated. Now, there is a widespread belief among Muslims at the present time that time is now present or immediately approaching.
We live in the end times.
Yes, we live at the end of time, and a lot of things happening in the world do give some support to that. And we live at the end of time. This is the final stage when we will all get to our final destinations. And that means that mutual assured destruction, as I said before, is not a deterrent, it's an inducement.
Well, so George W. Bush was wrong. Islam is not a religion of peace. You see, what I'm trying to do is it's not a fringe element. The antipathy toward the West stems from deep within the religion and the tradition itself.
It's a mistranslation. You know, the Muslim greeting is Salam Alaikum, which is usually translated peace be with you. But Salam doesn't mean peace, it means salvation.
And Islam, I believe, means submission. You know, I, by the way, contrary to what an awful lot of people now feel, believe that George W. Bush was a great president. And
you spoil for a fight every day.
I do. Well, one of the things wrong with him that compromised his greatness was his fear of seeming to be at war with the whole Muslim world when he wanted to be at war only with the radical Islamists, or again what I insist on calling Islamofascism.
Right.
And he bent over backwards to dispel any possible impression that the enemy was Islam, which is why he continually praised Islam as a religion of peace and various other characterizations. And there was a short period when he began or tried to name the enemy as Islamist radicalism, and the roof fell in on him, and he retreated from that thereafter. So we were in the position, and still are, by the way, of fighting a war. We've had on two fronts, really three: one Iraq, the other Afghanistan, and the Cold War with Iran against an enemy which has remained nameless.
Name it.
Islamofascism. And I'll tell you what I mean by Islamofascism. Partly what I learned from Bernard about the influence of both Nazism and communism on the politics of the Islamist groups of the 20th century. But I think that this is an enemy with a two-headed enemy. One is religious and one is political or secular. The religious element is Islamist, and the expectations that Bernard described that the religious Muslims hold. And the other was the secular face, which could be summarized or epitomized by Saddam Hussein. And when we went to war after 9/11, we went to war first against one of these heads, that is the religious one in Afghanistan, and then what I would call the secular head, the fascist part. I think that, and when I say I think that George W. Bush was a great president, I think he properly understood the nature of the threat that had been posed against it even before 9/11, but that we finally recognized and woke to after 9/11, and designed a strategy to contend with it, much as Harry Truman did in 1948 in the face of the threat of Soviet totalitarianism. And we are still fighting this war, only nobody wants to recognize it. I mean, it was hardly mentioned in the presidential campaign we've just concluded.
And that's right. I think the thing you should take away from that, well, there are many, but when learned people such as Norman Podhoretz and Bernard Lewis speak about this issue, you should listen. But I found it interesting when Dr. Podhoretz was talking about the multi-headed beast, if you will, of religion and politics in this religion that they were having to fight, and its intersection with leftist political movements of fascism, socialism, Marxism, communism. All of that is very interesting. And I think all of that is very relevant to where we're at in Daniel and Revelation talking about these things. These are conversations that have not really taken place in history ever. But there is a convergence of events and circumstances in the world, and Jews living in Israel with their own state called Israel, that should cause all of us to sit up and take notice that maybe the prophets were right. Maybe what they had to say, maybe they were serious, and we should take them seriously. And I tend to agree. That's why I talk about it all the time, because I think by and large people don't look at it that way. They don't take it serious. They think everything will go along. We're chained to the top row of the stadium, but we're only 43 minutes into the dropping of the eye water, and how quickly could that water rise? Well, it could be like a flood. It could be like those people, or the people who get this impression that our people, our neighbors and everything, are walking around looking at the pretty rocks in the bay, wondering what's that white foamy thing coming our way. And we have the answers to them. It's Jesus Christ and the gospel. And so that's what our compassion should lead us to share with people, is that gospel, that truth, and the hope that the Lord is coming.